Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Returning from their self-imposed modding hiatus in the last month or so, VRC have released this, the 1991 Jordan 191 for Assetto Corsa. Those of you who are lifelong Formula One fans, you know exactly what this is that you're looking at, and this car bears no need for an introduction. The Jordan 191, of course, the first car fielded by Jordan Grand Prix in their first season in Formula One. Having come out of Formula 3 with some good experience, Eddie Jordan, the Irishman, decided to have a go at Formula 1. And with a ragtag team of 3 designers and managers, including himself, of whom Gary Anderson was the chief designer, they came up with the 191 for the start of the 1991 Grand Prix season. The car is a bit of a cult classic in Formula One history, not only because of its association, of course, with Jordan, whose rock and roll, carefree attitude brought a whole bunch of levity that was much needed to the paddock. The car is also most memorable, probably for the story of the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix. In 1991, Jordan, as happens with a whole bunch of new upstart fledgling Formula One teams, they had quite a few drivers for the 1991 season. On that list includes names like Andrea De Cesaris, Alessandro Zanardi, Roberto Moreno, Bertrand Gachot, and one Michael Schumacher. The circumstances leading into the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix are very much befitting the typical pomp, circumstance, and controversy that we see from Formula One. Long story short, Bertrand Gachot was going to jail, and therefore he would not be available to drive the number 32 Jordan in the Belgian Grand Prix. However, Eddie Jordan had taken notice and a bit of a liking to a young, upstart, relatively obscure driver out of Germany by the name of one Michael Schumacher. Jordan was impressed with Schumacher's performances with Mercedes in sports car racing over at Le Mans, and therefore he decided to give Schumacher a chance at Formula One, driving the 191 at Spa-Francorchamps for the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. Schumacher, relatively obscure, relatively unknown, but known for his speed and his determination, did not disappoint in that first outing with Jordan. In qualifying, he managed to put the car a wonderful 7th on the grid. This car was brand new. The team was brand new. Nobody expected any really great performances out of Jordan, but there was Schumacher qualifying 7th in his Grand Prix debut. However, unfortunately for Jordan and for Schumacher, clutch problems on lap 1 signaled an early end to the debutant Germans' Belgian Grand Prix. However, Schumacher's performance, particularly in qualifying, did put the writing on the wall for all of Formula One. This guy was something special, and he would prove here to stay. After the Belgian Grand Prix, one Flavio Briatore of the Benetton team signed Schumacher to drive for him for the remainder of 1991, and then, as we might say, the rest is history. Schumacher would go on to drive for Benetton in 1992, taking his first Grand Prix victory in 1992 at the Belgian Grand Prix, where his career all started, and then many years later, Schumacher, once again at Spa, would clinch his 7th and final Drivers' World Championship, the greatest of all time when it comes to Drivers' Championships and race victories. Michael Schumacher. A legend was born in 1991 in this, the Jordan 191. A little bit about the car, its competition history, its technical specs, and all of that wonderful stuff as we continue to rotate here in showroom view. In keeping with Formula One design tradition, especially in the mid-90s, we have got ourselves a 4-wheeled, mid-engine Formula One car. It's a wing car, we've got a big diffuser at the back, it's all carbon throughout, carbon fiber monocoque for the survival cell there, including the cockpit and all of the mounting points for the suspension and all that good stuff. Speaking of the suspension, at the front end we have a double wishbone pushrod arrangement. As we can see here, you can see the upper and lower wishbones coming out from the chassis to the wheel, and then the pushrod coming up from the wheel into the chassis there, where it goes into that very nicely rendered opening where it interfaces with the dampers on the front end there, mounted on top, as you would expect. The rear suspension is a similar story, double wishbone pushrod, a little bit more difficult to see here just because of the angles, but you can see the upper and lower wishbones and the pushrod going up there at 45 degrees into the top of the gearbox where those dampers would be mounted. In terms of our engine, we have a Ford V8 in this car. It is the Ford Type HBA4, 3.5 liters displacement at a 75-degree bank angle on that V8 engine. Naturally aspirated, of course, no turbocharging in Formula One after the end of the 1988 season, remember. The gearbox, 6-speed manual designed by Hewland and optimized by Jordan for the packaging and application requirements that they had here. Also, that gearbox, I'd imagine, had to be beefed up a little bit to deal with the torque demands coming out of that Ford V8. I would say about 650 horsepower coming out of that engine, and then of course you need to make sure your gearbox is robust enough to keep up with that torque demand. So Jordan optimizing that Hewland gearbox, straight up, good old 6-speed manual, none of that flappy paddle nonsense in this thing. Pure driving. Fuel and lubricants provided by BP, and then of course it runs on those Goodyear Eagle tires, which were pretty much ubiquitous up and down the field in that 1991 season. Competition history for the 191, of course, it was fielded by what was then known as 7-Up Jordan. You'll notice the very conspicuous 7-Up branding all over the car as their team's title sponsor. Over the course of 16 races contested, it scored fastest lap in one of them, the 1991 Hungarian Grand Prix. Hungary is one of those tracks that's often viewed as an equalizer in Formula One. It's very technical and it's very tight, so if you have a little bit of a power deficit, as this car certainly did, its Ford V8 putting out about 650 horsepower relative to Ferrari, McLaren with the V12 engine easily putting out 750 plus, and Williams with their V10 by Renault putting out about 750, maybe even 800. The car was able to score fastest lap at Hungary because engine power is not that important there, and if you have a good chassis, it's going to come through at a very technical circuit like the Hungaroring. The rest of its competition history, though, not all that illustrious, scoring no wins, no podiums, and no pole positions. However, 2 fourth-place finishes are to the Jordan 191's credit. Very cool first season in Formula One for Eddie Jordan. Jordan, of course, would go on to achieve great things in Formula One, and they are remembered very fondly. Between 1991 and 2005, they contested a whole bunch of races. They were on the grid for every Grand Prix that they were eligible to enter from 91 to 2005. They were able to score some race victories, namely in 1999, which was their best season. They had a beautiful car in the Jordan 199, driven by Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Damon Hill. Frentzen was able to score some wins, I believe 3 wins that year, and with a little bit of a twist of fate, Heinz-Harald Frentzen would have been the 1999 world champion. Michael Schumacher had a broken leg from his accident at Silverstone, so he was sidelined for most of the rest of the season, leaving Mika Häkkinen open to capitalize on that. Mika Salo, Schumacher's interim replacement at Ferrari, also was able to challenge for that championship, as was Eddie Irvine, who very nearly got that championship as well. But Heinz-Harald Frentzen in that Jordan put in some stellar performances. I remember particularly the 1999 French Grand Prix, wonderful drive by Heinz-Harald Frentzen and wonderful performances by Eddie Jordan and team. The end of 2005, Jordan was sold off to the Marussia Group, I believe, or at least it was some sort of Russian consortium that later brought us the Midland Formula One team. It was the Midland Group they were sold to, not the Marussia Group. Midland came in 2006, replacing that grid slot where Jordan would occupy. They later were sold off to Spiker, and ultimately Force India arose from the ashes of that Jordan-Midland deal, and Force India, of course, still on the grid with us today. So Jordan, not on the grid in name since 2005, however, still very much with us in spirit. Eddie Jordan himself, he's become a TV pundit. He's often very controversial with his claims and his statements. However, love him or hate him, you do pay attention to what he says. And that is thanks in no small part to what he was able to do for Formula One. He was an upstart guy, upstart team, and he was able to sign the biggest talent that we have seen in the last 20 years, Michael Schumacher. He gave Schumacher his start in Formula One, and it ultimately culminated in 91 race victories and 7 World Drivers' Championships. Eddie Jordan having that foresight to see that Schumacher was something special all the way back in 91 when he was still relatively obscure, that is how you write a legend. And Jordan will always be remembered for his contribution to Formula One, not only in signing Schumacher, but the atmosphere and levity that he brought to the paddock. It is something that is sorely missed. However, for all of us here in Assetto Corsa, we can keep those dreams alive now with VRC's Jordan 191. Enough about the competition history. Let's see what we've got here in terms of the mod itself, brought to us from VRC. I should note that this is the 1.0 spec, meaning that it is free for all of us to download. I will have a link to VRC's website in the description. It is a free download. This is version 1.0. This is not a beta spec. Also, it does bear mention that the 191 has existed in various guises for Assetto Corsa for at least the last 2 years, maybe even 3. I don't know the whole history of this mod, but I do know that it did not originate with VRC. I don't know who the first developer of it was. Therefore, even though I have had those previous versions of the 191, I've not wanted to feature them, and I've certainly not wanted to review them simply because I haven't been able to give proper credit to the designers and developers. However, now that VRC have taken this under their wing, and they've brought it to a very logical conclusion, I must say, now I feel comfortable talking about it and giving credit at very least to VRC, but also I want to extend my thanks to whoever it was who was the initial designer, the initial modder of this, because your work was great as it was. VRC have merely taken that and moved it very gently forward with their know-how and brought it to us in the spec that we see today. So thank you to VRC and whoever you are, the initial modder behind this car. Thank you very much for your efforts. It's a great contribution to the Assetto Corsa community and of course to the larger community of Formula One fans in sim racing. Speaking of what we've got brought to us by VRC, you can see we've got great modeling and great texture work as we've come to expect from these guys. That wonderful green paint, the Irish four-leaf clover green that Jordan ran in their first year, you can see that reproduced very nicely here, very nicely reflective. The sponsorship graphics are all very crisp and appropriately located. I have a 1/18th scale model of the Jordan 191 as well in the Spa spec driven by Schumacher in his first race, and absolutely, this is 100% correct. I would not be surprised if the VRC guys also have a model or two of this car and they used it for reference, because this is absolutely wonderful work. You can see this front wing for which the car was noticed. It's very radical, but also, if you have a look at that profile, particularly the leading edge profile, it's got a delta shape to it, doesn't it? Now, it's going in the opposite direction from what we see today, but the 2017 wings with those delta profiles, you see some family resemblance there. I certainly do. All the way back in 1991, Jordan, who had to cobble this car together with very limited resources on short notice, came up with that delta design, and it's a little reminiscent of the Tyrrell from 1990 with 2 front wing main planes mounted individually, independently to that nose. Jordan, of course, going for a single main plane design, but you can see that sort of design influence going on here. Absolutely wonderful, and for the 2017 cars to have that delta wing profile, very interesting indeed, and I do wonder if the Formula One technical working group looked at the Jordan 191 and said, you know what, that was a cool looking car, let's do something like that for 2017. Just speculation on my part, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody took notice and remembered all of those years later. Looking around the rest of the car here, moving toward midships, you can see all of the sponsorship graphics very nicely placed, all appropriately sized and spaced out, I must say. Wonderful paintwork, that blue going down the midline of the car going from top to bottom. Very nice with that white pinstripe going across, separating the green from the blue. Very, very cool job indeed, VRC. Coming around to the left rear quarter, you can see these panels here that are just a rears of the Tic Tac logo. This is indicative of the sort of catch-all design work that Formula One teams used to do. You can see these 2 shut lines going across the car, moving a rears of that Tic Tac logo. You can see those panels there, they're blanked off right now, but you can see the bolt holes there, the stays for that bodywork. Very easily removable, I'd imagine those panels are, and therefore you were able to adapt this car for basically any sort of running conditions that you found in terms of your temperature, ambient temperatures. These guys didn't go to Bahrain all the way back in 1991, but nowadays you see the teams coming out with new rear end treatments, for example, at every Grand Prix, and they'll cite cooling requirements and things like that. But back in 91, at least for Jordan, all they did was put some blanking panels over some ducts, and then if they needed to open them up for more cooling, they just took the panels off and there it was. They didn't have to modify the car at all or redesign any components. So I do wonder if some of the development costs in modern Formula One could be staved off simply by designing that adaptability into the car from the get-go. Just a thought. I don't want to get too preachy here, but we talk about development costs all the time. Why not design your cars with a little bit of adaptability already built in? Moving to the rear section here, this is probably the most unique feature on the Jordan 191. You can see this absolutely massive diffuser at the back, and it's deceptive because I say it's very simple. I would actually call this a single level diffuser. Now, I'm deriving that single level description from the fact that you can see the floor on the outboard sides of the car, just inboard of the rear wheels. You can see the floor just basically scraping the ground, and then we have this absolutely huge central tunnel to the tune of 2 tunnels, supplemented by exhaust blowing. Exhaust blown diffusers were basically ubiquitous up and down the grid in the early 90s, and Jordan, of course, no exception. But you can see those 2 tunnels there, absolutely huge, and you can visualize all of that air being sucked underneath the car and blown out the back at incredible velocity. Certainly responsible for all of that rear downforce that you would get. The rear wing, of course, helping out as well, but that diffuser just absolutely huge. I do believe McLaren ran a similar diffuser in 1990 on the MP45B. However, I'd have to confirm that, but similar rear end treatment here on the Jordan, although McLaren ran a single absolutely massive tunnel out the back, whereas Jordan are running 2. Very cool design touch. And also you're able to just see that variation in design that you had up and down the grid in the early 90s. Between the technical side of this car has a V8 engine, Ferrari were running V12s, McLaren were running V12s, Williams were running V10s, Ferrari and Williams running the semi-automatic paddle shift gearbox, McLaren with a 6-speed manual, Jordan here with a 6-speed manual. Such diversity up and down the grid in terms of design, yet this car was able to be competitive on occasion, finishing 4th twice, so rubbing shoulders right up there with McLaren and Williams, and then Schumacher able to qualify 7th. That's only a couple rows back from pole position. So this car, as rudimentary as it is in some respects, was able to play with the big boys with that relatively crude technology that goes all the way back really to the 1930s. So absolutely wonderful climate for design in this era in Formula One. The idea that you could get a team with limited resources and limited design capability in terms of the technology that they had at the time, and they're able to be competitive even with a relatively basic package, that is absolutely awesome. And I think that's something that Formula One desperately needs, because we shouldn't have teams folding simply because they can't invest in the absolute latest CFD software and supercomputers, because that's not what racing is. Racing is about somebody with an idea and a lot of courage and a little bit of money and is able to go out there and try something a little crazy. That is exactly what Jordan did in 1991, and they were able to turn that into a Formula One presence spanning from 1991 to 2005, taking victories and challenging for the 1999 World Championship. Absolutely wonderful story is Jordan. Of course, we can look into the cockpit here. Here from above you can see the details going on. Very rudimentary stuff, I must say, but we can fly into the cockpit and have a look at what the driver's eyes can see. In the cockpit here, the eye point is pretty much exactly from where we'll be driving the car, so you can get a good sense of your sight lines there. Very good visibility, except directly in front of you, because the monocoque just sort of comes up to that point there, that apex point. But again, if you're used to driving Formula One cars, you know how to do this. You just sort of project your imagination over the front end of the car, and generally you can get away with everything with no problems. The mirror placement here is absolutely perfect, great visibility to the rear, and then of course you've got your instrumentation in the cockpit. This is 1991. We're in that era, that transition between analog and digital. This car still for the most part analog. As I mentioned, we have that manual gearbox, but we do have an LCD in front of us for our dash display. It'll have a rev counter up there, which is an analog rendering from the digital data coming through. You'll also have your speed, gear, and lap time on that display. Other than that, though, that's pretty much all of the information that the driver has. So a big change from what we have today. The little handheld computers that the steering wheels are. This one, straight up steering wheel with one button on it, which I believe would be for the radio. So that's about it. All of your other controls are over on the sides of the cockpit in more traditional locations. Looking around the cockpit itself, very Spartan and very utilitarian. You can see the nice weave of the carbon there through the cockpit surround, but that's about it. It doesn't have to look pretty, it just has to work, and it certainly did work for Jordan all the way back in 1991. You can see here emblazoned on the back here, German flag and Schumacher. Yes, I wonder whatever happened to Michael Schumacher. Here we've got the padding there just to keep the driver's helmet from bouncing against the back of the car too much, and then panning up you have this very menacing and very dramatic looking air snorkel. That's of course the air intake for the top side of the V8 engine. Very cool, and I like from the external view you can see how it slopes downward very sharply in this rather abstract looking shape. I very much like it, and it certainly contributed to this car winning that Autosport Award for 1991, the most beautiful racing car. Definitely agree with that statement. Looking around the floor of the cockpit here where the driver's legs would be, you can see the fire extinguisher bottle there, and then looks like we have a master ignition kill and a few other switches that are obscured by the steering wheel, but they're all there, very nicely modeled. Nice job, VRC. We'll leave the cockpit here and just take one last look at the car. You can see that air snorkel there, that shape that I was referring to. Very cool shape. I just like that an awful lot. I think some of that probably had to do for the rollover protection rules that you had. The driver has to sit in a triangle superimposed between the top of the roll bar and the front of the cockpit, so that shape would allow a little bit more clearance for the driver's head in the event of a rollover, but absolutely wonderful design. I want to see a Formula One car with a shape like that again. That just looks so cool. However, enough of looking at the car. We of course have to drive the thing. Because we've got Schumacher's name on it, number 32, the car appears as it did at the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix. There is no other place to have a run in this car than Spa-Francorchamps. Unfortunately, it's the modern version of the circuit, which has been changed a little bit since 1991, but it is still Spa. And of course, when we talk about the career of Michael Schumacher, all roads lead to and from Spa. His first race, his first win, and his final world championship all occurred there. We'll see you there in just a moment.
Welcome to Spa. Here, before we get out on track, of course, a look through the setup screen, and just to show you what is what with the default setup here on the Jordan 191. Here in the gear cluster, you can see your gearbox, first through sixth gear, and final drive. You can adjust these in any way you like. Pretty wide range of adjustments, I must say, particularly on that final drive ratio. You can see what you can do with your top speeds there. So you've got plenty of customization here in terms of the different circuits that you might want to visit. Tires, you get your choice of compounds, defaults to the C compound, but it goes down to the E compound, which is the softest, all the way up to the A compound, which is the hardest. Tire pressures default at 10 psi, they go down to 8, and they go up to 12, so relatively small window there for your tire pressures. Fuel, lots of fuel in this car, no refueling during the Grand Prix. Remember, in this era, maximum capacity is 212 liters, as you can see there. We'll shut it down here, though, for the moment. Aero, this is interesting and pretty typical now of VRC products. Watch the wing flaps on the front wing. You can see the default values there, 7 on the front and 5 on the rear, but as we ramp up the front wing, you can see those flaps, they change in their angle of attack as you ramp the wing up and down. Wonderful feature there, and I really hope that we start to see this on more Formula One cars in the modding world. Same here on the rear wing, a little bit difficult to see perhaps. Maybe we get a somewhat better angle there. Watch the main plane. And actually all of the flaps, you can see that center element of the wing actually is added in when you get to 2 degrees of step there, and then the angle of attack on all of the flaps continues to change as you ramp the wing up. Jordan, very unique actually, running that triple element rear wing depending on your aero spec, and that central element deleted entirely once you go down to step 1 and certainly into step 0, where you get that secondary main plane element actually deleted as well. Great little detail. We'll be running it here in this spec here with those 3 elements there on the wing. That double beam wing, I absolutely love it. Alignment here, camber and toe on all 4 corners, pretty standard as you might expect. Dampers, bound and rebound settings, as you might expect as well. Drivetrain, here's where you make your diff adjustments in power, coast, and preload. Generic, brake bias, brake power, and your steering assist, your power steering settings. suspensions, your anti-roll bars front and rear, your heave rates, your travel ranges on the suspension, and of course your ride heights, all there for the adjusting. And then of course the default pit stop strategy screen there in Assetto Corsa. That's what's going on with the default setup. I have some semblance of a setup here for myself, just adding a little bit of rake into the car as I like. Otherwise, keeping everything pretty much the same. I've made a little bit of adjustment to the gearbox just to max out our top speed at the end of the Kemmel straight. And then, of course, our wings, I've made some aero adjustments there as well. We'll be running in this spec. Seems to be pretty solid for Spa. Maybe a little bit more front wing for this run, just a touch. Other than that, though, everything is still pretty much default. I do like a little bit more power diff, however, just because of my throttle application, and a little bit more coast diff as well. Preload will remain the same. Brake bias will be the same, and then the car actually feels pretty good on default suspension. So that's what we're going to do. We'll add a little bit more fuel in for our little demonstration run here. And our tire compounds, we're going to run on the C compound, so the middle of the range. In the cockpit now you see our eye point a little bit farther forward than it was in the showroom view, but in terms of elevation, everything's still the same. You can see the sight lines there. You can also see the dashboard is now alive. We have our rev counter up at the top, so you can see what's going on there. And then, of course, we have our water temperature reading 74 degrees C, lap time ticking away down on the bottom right, and our fuel level over on the upper right. And that is about all we can see here on that dash display. Very rudimentary, but it doesn't really need to tell you all that much because there's not much going on in this car. Everything is driver-driven, so manual gearbox and all that stuff. That clutch, which spelled the end of Michael Schumacher's Belgian Grand Prix in 1991, you're dealing with that all the time. 6-speed manual box, and that Ford V8 making a very nice noise, I must say. So, without further ado, clutch in, first gear, and gingerly let's pull away, taking care of that clutch on the Jordan 191. So just doing a sensible install lap here, just trying to get everything up to temperature. Getting some heat into the tires and brakes. Of course, we won't be able to warm the brakes up until we get to the end of Kemmel here. And the Ford V8 comes to life. So far, this very sensible warm-up run. Car feels very positive already. Of course, there's basically no heat in the tires, so not much grip yet. But already you can definitely feel some very positive feedback from that engine. Lots of torque from a V8 engine, as always. No difference here. That Ford unit singing away. Final chicane, let's get some more heat into that front end. Brake's still a little bit cold. You can snatch them up pretty easily if you're not careful. Full revs now on the engine. About 12,000 RPM on the crankshaft. Blanchiment already flat out. The new bus stop. That's a feature that was not at Spa in 1991, but it's what we've got nowadays. I must say I do miss the old bus stop chicane, but I think the spirit of it is very much alive still. There we go. That's some beans for you. Eau Rouge, I don't think it's going to be quite flat. Indeed, it is not. Then down Kemmel. Coming down the straight here, you will notice that we do have a little bit of a power deficit, especially relative to the Williams or the Ferrari. We're just touching the mid-190s there in our speed coming down to the end of the Kemmel Straight. I've geared it to 202 as our max speed there, but definitely a bit of a power deficit, I would say to the tune of 50 to maybe 80 horsepower from the front runners. Through Pouhon, little dab of brake. Get on the throttle as quickly as you can. You do know that you're dealing with a car that's not quite at the sharp end of the field, simply because your cornering grip just isn't quite there to the extent that it might be in a Ferrari or a Williams. However, you don't care all that much about that, because you get the satisfaction of rowing up and down through a manual gearbox, using a clutch, all of that good stuff. You know that the performance is directly linked to what you do as the driver. And speaking of that driver who made his debut at this place in 1991, Michael Schumacher. When you think about Formula One drivers, you think about two names, really. You think about Ayrton Senna, and you think about Michael Schumacher. Such was the impact that those two men made on this sport that they have essentially become the working definition of not only a Formula One driver, but of a race driver in general. And when you're in this car, done to such high fidelity by VRC, and you think about what Michael Schumacher must have been feeling on that day in 91, going out for his qualifying laps, putting it on P7 in his Formula One debut, you realize that that was a huge challenge. Not only was it his Formula One debut, not only was it basically his first time in the car, but you're dealing with a car that's not supposed to be a front runner. Yes, it finished fourth in 2 occasions, but you just start to understand the depth of that challenge that he must have been facing, and the skill and determination and willpower that he displayed in order to do that successfully was just something else. And that is what caught the attention of Flavio Briatore, for sure. Just being a little bit cautious still in the corners. We're on those C compounds, remember, so they're reasonably hard. We got good temperature now in the brakes and tires, though, so we can start talking about how the car feels. It's coming into Stabilo now. You do notice marked understeer in this car. Some of that down to the setup, some of that down to the harder tires, but I think most of that down to just this is Jordan's first car. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. You can certainly find cars that are far worse. However, you do know that this is just the very beginning of what Jordan would eventually do in Grand Prix racing. This is their first attempt, and for a first attempt it is absolutely remarkable, but compared to the front runners it's just not quite there, and that's excusable. Going through Eau Rouge, you do note the aero deficits there. If you keep your foot in it and you have a little bit of courage, you can take Eau Rouge and Radillon flat. However, I don't recommend it if you're fighting for position in a race. You're more apt to lose it than not. So discretion there is the better part of valor. On the brakes, you'll note that the brakes grab very severely. It's very easy to lock the front axle on this car. Of course, you can play with the brake pressure and brake bias settings, but no matter what you do be careful on those brakes, because you can lock them up, and sometimes you can actually lock them up relatively early in the braking zone, so do be careful. They're very powerful, but they lack a little bit of feel, perhaps. And then, of course, in a situation like that, and we actually tag the wall, exhaust-blown diffuser rearing its ugly head. That diffuser is not working very efficiently until you get on the throttle pretty much flat out. So you've got to be careful when you're coming out of corners, as you just saw. The car is happy at full throttle, but at the same time, you've got to watch that you don't spin up the rear tires like I did. So you've got two things working against you out of those medium-speed corners. You need grip, so don't overwhelm the traction capability on the rear axle, and you want to get that diffuser working. A little bit of a downforce deficit because we've done a little bit of damage on the front end. We'll pit to rectify that situation. I don't think Blanchemont's going to be flat anymore. Indeed, it is not. Let's go repair that damage, shall we? Alright, I am happy with the tires. We'll put some new tires on it just for the sake of it. Pressures are good. We'll repair any damage that we've got. And we're not going to add any fuel. Also give you a chance to see what the pit stop looks like. So not all is lost. Relatively quick tire change, and off we go. Eau Rouge, Radillon, yep, that's flat. Tires were in the blankets, so that's okay. Also a little bit lighter on fuel now. Coming down Kemmel, 192, 193, 194, just touching before we've got to get on the brakes. Understeer, of course, through here, always. Pretty much every Formula One car understeers through these two corners especially. Then the almighty Pouhon. You know if a car is good if you can take Pouhon reasonably well, and that time we took it reasonably well. Through the Fagnes chicane. Tires coming up to temperature now. You will note understeer, as I mentioned before, and you do have to watch out for that snap oversteer, which caught me out last lap. In terms of the engine response, it's exactly what you would expect. It's a very torquey V8 engine. As I mentioned, about 12,000 RPM is the red line there on your crankshaft speed. Most of your power comes in around 8,500 to 10,000, so revving it out to the max is not necessarily the way to go, but of course you can. You do have to watch your downshifts, because I don't really think that there's too much in the way of a rev limiter on the engine, so you've got to be careful in terms of what you do with your gear changing in the upshift and downshift direction. So in some cases it does help to get your braking done first and then think about your downshifts. A little bit of snap oversteer again out of La Source. Eau Rouge and Radillon, flat. Take stock of where we are, get on the brakes. Just deal with Les Combes sensibly. A little bit of double clutch action, skipping from 5th to 3rd. He's hesitating a little bit on the power there through the corner with no name. There's that understeer coming in again. Definitely the story of this car. There is a bit of understeer in it. That's okay, though. See here on the exit curves, you can use a lot of exit curbing provided that they're the flat type. You don't want to go over the curbing if it's a little bit too steep, such as the ride height on a car like this. It's very, very low. And remember, before 1994, there was no step plane on the bottom of the car, so flat bottom. If you bottom it out, you will lose all downforce to the diffuser, so just be mindful of that. High curbs, not this car's friend. At low speeds it doesn't matter as much, but you can still turn the car into a surfboard if you're not careful. A bit of a late turn in and an early apex for La Source. The thing does like to row through the gears, though, I'll give you that. See our water temp there at 86 degrees C. That's all nominal. Fuel level 51. Just taking stock of things as you're going down the straight, thinking about the braking zone, getting into the braking zone, getting your downshifts done, watching the back end there. Again, the car is very unpredictable at times in that transitional zone between mechanical and aero grip. So sometimes it likes to go into a little bit of a four-wheel drift. Other times it'll give you understeer. Other times it'll give you oversteer. So you do have to pay attention to it on the approach to every single corner. Fourth gear through the final chicane. Get on the power a little bit earlier if possible, not if you've got understeer. There's that snap oversteer catching me out again. Again, you've got to be careful. I don't think we tagged the wall. We did not. See, that transitional zone between aero and mechanical grip, you've just got to watch out for it. Then you think about young Michael Schumacher. Knowing this about the car, as I'm sure he did, at a circuit like this, with so many high-speed corners, so many opportunities for something like that to happen, for him to put it on the grid in 7th position for his first Grand Prix, that must have been an absolutely superhuman feat. As you can see, I think I could now validate my characterization of this car as being tricky at the limit. It just twitches around in some unpredictable manners, and you've really got to have a lot of seat time in it to start to understand it, I'm sure. I don't have all that much seat time in it at the moment. I've only posted one video featuring this car so far, so I think you can understand why I'm still being caught out a little bit. But experienced drivers will start to get their heads around the handling dynamics of this 191 pretty easily, I must say, and then you'll start to budget your resources accordingly in terms of how you drive the thing. Generally speaking, it does help to get all your downshifts done before you turn into the corner. You don't want to be downshifting particularly in the middle of a corner. Really, you don't want to be changing gear at all in the middle of a corner. That's what every driving instructor in the world will tell you, particularly when you're learning how to drive a road car. You don't want to do your downshifts or your upshifts, really, in the middle of a corner. Again, it just sort of destabilizes the car, particularly on the back end, so you just don't want to have that situation going on. Let's see, do we have any semblance of a reasonable lap time here? The 150s are about where the car should be. We're not going to be there on this lap, that's for sure. Alright, so 159.855. The car has a lot more speed in it, perhaps not with this fuel load or with the C compound tires, but you can get a sense of where the pace really goes. Low 150s is probably where it ends up in qualifying trim on low tanks and sticky tires, so you can definitely expect that sort of performance from it. I've just got to say, though, there is something about a V8 Formula One car from yesteryear that just makes you go all soft on the inside, because it just has that sound. It's got that crack when you get on throttle. No, they don't sound as exquisite as the V10s or V12s. No, they don't have the same sort of horsepower. Yes, that manual gearbox can be a little bit clunky at times, but it's just furious. And part of driving a race car is knowing that you've got something underneath you that is so much better than you. This car definitely leaves you with that impression. It is by far not the quickest of its time. It is by far not the most highly developed of its time. I don't think anything could even come close to the Williams FW14, and again, I get it wrong on that high curbing, just like I told all of you not to do. But in terms of that development race, this car just can't hold a candle to the front runners, but still, it allows you to get a sense of just that fury that Formula One had through the 80s, and then it carried it over into the beginning of the 90s. Just absolutely awesome level of performance, and it's a truly visceral experience. I do have a heck of a vibration now from all four corners due to the lovely flat spots that I've put on the tires now in at least two places. I just can't help but think about what must have been going through Michael Schumacher's mind trying to grapple with this thing. Yes, he had driven sports cars at Le Mans. Yes, he had dealt with big turbochargers and 1,000 horsepower before. Yes, he had success in Formula 3, but this was Formula 1, and this is a car that kind of, in many respects, had no business being there, yet it was somehow competitive. And to be thrown into that situation, that took talent. That really did. Yep, those flat spots really starting to take away my performance now. Only have myself to blame for that. Stay off of the high curbing. Blanchiment should still be flat, and indeed it is. Careful on the throttle there, no downforce yet. Into Eau Rouge, and Radillon clip the curb on the entrance to Eau Rouge and then on the exit of Radillon, but don't touch it anywhere else. Think about the braking zone, hard on the brakes, down through the box 3 gears. Wait for the car to be there and then give it power. Deal with the understeer and then lay on it as quickly as you dare. Up into 5th gear, approaching Pouhon, let it rev out all the way. Dab of the brakes, hesitate on the throttle for a moment, enjoy the exit launch. Grab 6th over the curbs. Up to Fanier's, skip down into 4th if you want. Down towards Stavelot. 3rd gear, watch the inside curbs. Use the outside curbs as much as you want, but be careful on the power. rejoining the old circuit now. Coming back up the hill to start finish. String of sequential downshifts there. On to start finish, on the power as hard as you want. Seems like the 59s are all I could manage, at least for the moment. Making a right mess of the downshifts coming into there, got away with it. Had to come off of the power there. It will scare you. It will definitely scare you from time to time. Again, the car can be a little inconsistent from corner to corner, as I said at the beginning, so it keeps you alert. We'll put it that way. Yeah, understeer city there. Just trying to push it for all it's worth. I found the limit there. Yep, tires going off. Absolutely, tires are going off now. I mean, I've tortured the hell out of them, so it's hardly unexpected. Blanchiment's still barely flat. It won't be on the next lap, but that is okay. Because it's into the pits with us. Putting one more flat spot there on the right front. So, back into the pits in the Jordan 191. Had more off-track excursions than perhaps we're used to seeing in these reviews, but it's all staying there. Totally uncut because you deserve to see the character of the car, and that's what I endeavor to do with these. So there it is. It will spit you off the road in very much uninvited fashion, but that is what you can expect from VRC's Jordan 191 from the 1991 Formula One season. There it is, ticking its way cool in the pit lane. Michael Schumacher's debut Formula One drive in this at the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix. It's the stuff of legend, just like Michael Schumacher himself is a legend, and very much like the Jordan Formula One team is also in and of itself a legend nowadays. Unfortunately, they're gone from the sport, but they made a very lasting impression to the point now where modding teams like VRC are starting to emulate their wonderful race cars from years gone by. Absolutely wonderful addition to the Assetto Corsa Formula One lineup. You've all got to check it out. Again, this is version 1.0. It is free for everybody over on the VRC website. Again, there's a link in the description for those of you who are interested in having a go in this car. I do recommend that you take it out like I've done at Spa and just put yourself in Michael Schumacher's shoes. A young guy, relative unknown, getting his chance of a lifetime in Formula One in a car that is very, very twitchy and difficult to understand at times on the limit, yet he was able to qualify 7th and probably would have done all right in the race had the clutch not failed him. But of course, it was enough for him to earn that drive at Benetton for the end of the year. And of course, at Benetton, he would clinch the first 2 of his 7 World Drivers' Championships. A wonderful story from every angle, whether you're looking at it from a team side or from a driver side. Jordan Grand Prix, Michael Schumacher, 1991, Spa. Absolutely great story, and once again, I just have to say thanks to VRC for taking the time to put this car together and giving it to all of us. And also thank you as well to whoever the initial modder was who came up with this concept a few years ago. Absolutely wonderful contribution to the Assetto Corsa community. I cannot thank you guys enough. For the moment, though, of course, there are hot laps to come from Spa in the Jordan 191 without commentary. But before they come, I just, of course, want to say thank you to all of you for watching, and thank you for all of your continued engagement and your continued support. I very much appreciate it, more than you probably know. However, stay tuned for the hot laps, everybody. Signing off from the commentary side, Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much, and we will see you soon.